If you took a time machine back 3,000 years to ancient China and grabbed a random person from the Central Plains, their DNA would be almost identical to someone walking through modern Beijing today. Despite 3 millennia of wars, invasions, dynasties rising and falling, and massive population movements, Chinese genetics have remained virtually unchanged. But wait, it gets weirder. That same ancient Chinese person's DNA would also show up in a Korean farmer, a Vietnamese fisherman, and a Mongolian herder. Why? Because the Chinese didn't just create the world's longest continuous civilization. They helped populate an entire continent. And here's the kicker: the Mongol conquest that supposedly changed everything about China. Genetically, it barely left a trace. The Manchu invasion that established the Qing dynasty? Genetic impact, almost zero. Centuries of nomadic invasions from the north? You'd be hard-pressed to find their genes in modern China. Today, we're cracking the code of one of history's most shocking genetic mysteries. How did a people grow from a few farming villages to become 1.3 billion strong while keeping their DNA virtually intact? And why does Chinese genetics hold the key to understanding how a quarter of humanity came to exist? Picture this: it's 9,000 years ago. Most of the world's humans are still wandering around in small bands, hunting and gathering. But along the Yellow River in northern China, something revolutionary is happening. A group of hunter-gatherers looks at wild millet and thinks, what if we could make this grow exactly where we want it? They become some of the world's first farmers. And here's where the Chinese story gets crazy. These weren't just any farmers, they accidentally triggered the largest population boom in human history. According to a landmark study published in Current Anthropology, Chinese agriculture originated independently in multiple regions around 9,000 years ago, with millet farming in the Yellow River Basin and rice cultivation in the Yangtze River Valley. But recent DNA analysis has revealed something scientists call the Chinese Neolithic expansion, and it's like a genetic tsunami that reshaped an entire continent. Studies of ancient genomes show that Yellow River farmers spread their ancestry across southwest China, with ancient groups deriving approximately 90% of their ancestry from these Neolithic Yellow River farmers. This wasn't just cultural diffusion, it was genetic replacement on a massive scale. Within just a few thousand years, their descendants had spread from the Yellow River to the Yangtze, from the mountains of Tibet to the coasts of the South China Sea. But here's the plot twist. Unlike other agricultural expansions that involved conquering and replacing local populations, the Chinese expansion was more like a genetic copy-paste operation. Imagine you're a geneticist looking at East Asian DNA today. Surprise! From Korea to Vietnam, from Mongolia to Indonesia, you'll find the same underlying genetic signature that traces back to those original Chinese farmers. It's like they created a genetic template that became the foundation for a quarter of humanity. Fast forward to 7,000 years ago, the Chinese have mastered millet in the north, but something even more revolutionary is happening in the south: rice cultivation. And this isn't just about food, it's about creating a completely new form of human organization. Rice agriculture is insanely labor-intensive. You need to flood fields, transplant seedlings, coordinate irrigation systems. It requires massive cooperation and incredibly dense populations. Most societies would have collapsed under this complexity, but the Chinese, they thrived on it. Rice cultivation allowed them to support population densities that would have been impossible anywhere else in the world. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and cities became the foundation of Chinese civilization. Here's where genetics gets fascinating. This agricultural revolution is written in Chinese DNA. The AMY1 gene, which helps digest starch, appears in multiple copies in Chinese populations, way more than in most other groups. It's like natural selection was preparing the Chinese for a carbohydrate-heavy diet thousands of years before they even knew what carbohydrates were. But the real genetic magic happened with population growth. While other agricultural societies grew slowly, Chinese populations exploded. The genetic bottlenecks that usually happen when populations expand rapidly, they're barely visible in Chinese DNA. It's as if the Chinese figured out how to grow their population without losing genetic diversity. Now here's where Chinese genetics gets really wild. Around 2,000 years ago, something unprecedented happened: the creation of Han identity. Named after the Han dynasty, this wasn't just a political label, it became a genetic destiny. The Han identity was like a cultural magnet. It absorbed hundreds of different tribes, kingdoms, and ethnic groups into a single unified genetic pool. Imagine you're a local chief in ancient China. The Han arrive with their writing system, their technology, their government structure, and basically say, "Want to be part of the most successful civilization on Earth?" Most people said yes. And here's the genetic proof. Modern Han Chinese show incredible internal diversity, but it's all organized around the same core genetic signature. It's like a genetic jazz ensemble, where everyone's playing their own part. But they're all following the same basic melody. The result? Han Chinese became the world's largest ethnic group, comprising about 20% of all humans alive today. But genetically, they're not just one homogeneous blob, they're a complex symphony of regional variations all built on the same ancient foundation. Let's talk about the most surprising non-story in Chinese genetics, the Mongol conquest. Picture the scene, it's 1279 CE. The Mongols have just completed their conquest of China, establishing the Yuan dynasty. These were the same Mongols who had devastated Russia, conquered Central Asia, and created the largest contiguous empire in human history. Surely this would show up massively in Chinese DNA, right? Wrong. And the genetic evidence is mind-blowing. The Mongol genetic signature in China is almost invisible. The C2 haplogroup, the genetic calling card of Mongol populations, shows up in China at frequencies so low they're practically statistical noise. It's like the genetic equivalent of a whisper in a thunderstorm. The Manchus? Same story. Despite ruling China for nearly 300 years as the Qing dynasty, their genetic impact is barely detectable. The Tungusic genetic markers that define Manchu populations are rare in Han Chinese DNA. It's as if China developed some kind of genetic immunity to conquest. Armies could march through, dynasties could rise and fall, but the Chinese gene pool remained stubbornly, mysteriously unchanged. Here's the secret: cultural assimilation. The Chinese weren't just conquered, they were the conquerors. They absorbed their conquerors genetically, culturally, and linguistically. The Mongols and Manchus didn't change China, China changed them. Here's where Chinese genetics gets really fascinating. China might look like one country on a map, but genetically, it's like a collection of related populations, each with their own molecular signature. Head to northern China, and you'll find genetic connections to Central Asia and Mongolia. The Y chromosome haplogroup 03, which dominates northern China, tells the story of ancient expansions from the Yellow River Valley. Travel south to Guangdong or Fujian, and suddenly you're seeing genetic signatures that connect to Southeast Asia. The Austronesian genetic component, the signature of ancient seafaring populations, shows up in southern Chinese DNA. Move west to Xinjiang, and you'll find genetic connections to Europe and Central Asia. The R1A haplogroup, carried by ancient Indo-European populations, appears in Chinese populations near the Silk Road. But here's the amazing part. Despite this regional diversity, if you showed a geneticist DNA samples from anywhere in Han China, they could still identify them as Chinese. The underlying genetic signature is so consistent, so ancient, that it's like a genetic fingerprint that survived for millennia. The Silk Road wasn't just about trading silk and spices, it was about trading genes. For over 1,500 years, this network of trade routes connected China to the rest of the world. And the genetic evidence of these connections is written in Chinese DNA. In Western China, you can find genetic signatures from Persia, Central Asia, and even Europe. The famous Tarim mummies ancient European-looking people found in Western China, represent some of the earliest genetic exchanges along these trade routes. But here's what's fascinating. These genetic exchanges went both ways. Chinese DNA shows up in Central Asian populations, Mongolian populations, and even European populations along the Silk Road. It's like a genetic highway that connected half the world. The coolest part? You can literally trace ancient trade routes using DNA. Populations living near historical Silk Road cities show genetic signatures that mirror the trade goods that passed through their regions. It's like genetics is telling us the story of ancient commerce. Here's one of the most incredible stories in Chinese genetics: the island of Taiwan. When Chinese populations began migrating to Taiwan around 400 years ago, they created an accidental genetic time capsule. The Taiwanese Han populations preserve genetic signatures that are sometimes more ancient Chinese than populations in mainland China. It's like they froze a snapshot of Chinese genetics from centuries ago. But Taiwan's genetic story gets even more complex. The island was already inhabited by Austronesian-speaking indigenous peoples who had been there for thousands of years. When Chinese populations arrived, they didn't just replace the indigenous peoples, they mixed with them. The result? Taiwanese populations show a unique genetic blend that combines ancient Chinese signatures with Austronesian DNA. It's like a genetic recipe that exists nowhere else on Earth. Modern genetic studies of Taiwan are rewriting our understanding of Chinese migration patterns, Southeast Asian population history, and the spread of Austronesian languages across the Pacific. The 20th century completely transformed Chinese genetics. Political upheavals, wars, and economic changes scattered Chinese populations across the globe and mixed regional Chinese populations in unprecedented ways. The Chinese diaspora created genetic laboratories around the world. Chinese populations in Southeast Asia, America, and Europe began mixing with local populations in ways that had never happened before. But here's what's surprising. Even after generations of mixing, Chinese genetics remain identifiable. Studies of overseas Chinese populations show they maintain their genetic distinctiveness despite intermarriage with other populations. Modern China itself is becoming a genetic melting pot. Cities like Shanghai and Beijing have become genetic mixers where regional Chinese populations that were historically separated are now intermarrying. It's creating new combinations while preserving ancient patterns. I hope you enjoyed this video. Do like this video and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this.